because I'm delighted to say we can now bring into the conversation Housing and Levelling Up Secretary of State Michael Gove, who joins me now with more details of this announcement concerning what's called the cladding crisis. What is it you're announcing today, Mr. Gove? Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
We're seeing that 4.5 years after the dreadful fire at Grenfell, we want to ensure that buildings are at last made safe and that the people who are ultimately responsible should pay the developers, the freeholders, those with big bucks and big balance sheets, rather than the leaseholders, the individuals who have in many cases been trapped in unsafe buildings and also trapped, unable to move because mortgage costs have been impossible to meet.
And it's specifically on certain people as regards the meterage, if there is such a word, of where they find their apartments or houses. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the government's already stepped in, and my predecessors have secured billions of pounds to deal with high-rise buildings, and in most, though not all, regrettably, of those high-rise buildings in scope, work is either completed or ongoing. But it's also the case that there are other 11 to 18 metre buildings which do need work. These mid-rise buildings do need work in some cases, but the other thing we need to do is to make sure that while we absolutely ensure that everyone is in a building that is safe, we also get a sense of proportion, because it has been the case that there have been some companies who have been making money by saying that certain buildings are unsafe and more work is required, when that work really isn't required for safety. So you've had a sort of double problem. Both some people, some commercial players who haven't stood up to make buildings safe, and then other commercial players who've preyed on risk as well.
What happens to my listeners who are in buildings that are between 0 and 11 metres, then, Secretary of State?
Well, in most cases, in almost every case, those buildings will be safe in fire terms. But it's important, and one of the reasons why I've been talking to the National Fire Chief Council and others, it's important that we, as quickly and authoritatively as possible, make sure that we can provide people with confidence. And it's also the case that there is a new handy guide that we're producing today, which will enable any surveyor or any appropriate professional to conduct a sort of audit of a building in order to assess whether or not it is safe in fire safety terms.
How many buildings are we talking about that are currently unsafe? What's the number, Mr. Gove?
Well, that is part of the challenge, that we've relied so far on the owners of these buildings, the responsible figures, coming forward and saying, look, I have a cladding problem, or I have another problem, it needs remediation, it needs handling. And not everyone has come forward. So we are talking about thousands of buildings.
But how many thousand?
Well, again, we can't be absolutely precise about the exact number in scope. That is one of the things that I hope that we can do in conversation with owners and with developers at the moment.
But you won't need reminding that Grenfell took place in 2017. We're coming up to 5 years. I appreciate not on your watch, you're a relatively recent housing secretary. After nearly 5 years, we still don't know how many properties we're talking about.
Well, we know that we're talking at just over 100,000 flats in scope. And again, you know,
isn't that question almost number one that
you're telling me? Look, you know, when I came in, one of the things
you're nothing if not a detail man. Why wasn't the desk slammed and someone told how many properties are we talking about?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. Well, no,
you never
slamming
desks.
No. But you know, part of it is I said, where are the buildings? What progress has been made in dealing with them? What more requires to be done? And the situation I found, through no individuals to blame, but it's a particular problem in the system that was designed, means that people have themselves to come forward and say, we believe that this building needs work. So one of the things that I have sought to do is to come at the problem from both sides, both saying to the owners, developers, freeholders and so on, look, you're going to have to pay anyway, so you may as well come forward now, but also seeking to ensure that we can have, using the expertise of the fire brigade and others, a proper audit of potentially every building in scope, so that it's a pincer movement.
So here's the thing, were I a developer, and I were to hear this, if I did everything right at the time, if I used the materials that were approved by the building regs, building regulations at the time, then surely whoever put those building regulations at the time is the criminal, as it were, here. So that's the government and its set of regulations. Why am I having to pay for something that was legal at the time I fitted it?
Well, there are two things. I think the first thing is I would acknowledge that there are mistakes that government made.
So why do I have to pay to put it right? I did everything right at the time. I'm a developer. I'm a responsible developer. I fitted cladding that the government building regs said is fine. We now learned it isn't. But I was only abiding by the government regs at the time, Mr. Gove.
Yeah, I think the government did get stuff wrong, but it's also the case that there were lots of steps that were taken which put people at risk, and without wanting to preempt what the independent inquiry into Grenfell will conclude, I think you would be hard-pressed to say that putting essentially sheets of liquid petrol encased in metal on the side of a tower block was the right thing to do.
Building regulations, government building regulations said it was.
Not quite, but I won't get into that now, Nick, but I think it's fair to say that actually those who argue that they were compliant in doing that, I don't think have a very strong case. Certainly, those who have studied the detailed questioning at the inquiry, and as I say, it hasn't reached its conclusion yet, I think would be, what's the word? I think you'd have to be a very, very, very selective reader of the evidence there in order to draw that conclusion. One thing I would say is that for anyone who wants an instant guide to this question, there was a very good play called Value Engineering, produced by Nicholas Kent, written by Richard Norton-Taylor, former Guardian journalist. If you read that, that will give you a very, very good account of the different levels of responsibility. Certainly doesn't spare government. Very uncomfortable reading.
What doesn't spare you? I understand when you went to see it a couple of months ago, you were heckled. Not a couple of months ago, a while back. You were heckled, weren't you?
There was one person who did try to start a chant. I think they were joined by the person adjacent to them. Everyone else behaved impeccably.
What did you learn from the play?
It confirmed my view that this tragedy was avoidable, had all those with responsibility, from central government through local government to the cladding manufacturers and to the developers, had they all behaved responsibly. And it also reinforced in my mind the determination to ensure that the Grenfell community who've suffered so much get the justice that they deserve, and that we resolve this problem.